I know a man who was raised in a completely emotionally bankrupt home. There was no love there at all. Not particularly abusive, just no support, no love, no teaching, nothing, like a child raising himself. So he became isolated, afraid, withdrawn, had no relationships in all of his childhood or in his adult life, discovered real love, studied it, took the steps to find it, believed it, and felt it, which is remarkable. Not many people go through that entire process. He was simply amazed at how free he felt and happy. He said, I've never felt like this in my whole life. I've never even realized who I was my whole life. He had always been quiet. And as he felt more loved, he wondered if that was going to change. Well, as he became more loved, he certainly became less afraid, certainly functioned better, is talking with people much more freely, but he's discovering that he's still relatively quiet. Given the opportunity, I myself generally tend to be in groups of one or two, meaning myself and Donna, and sometimes some other people. I'm just not a naturally group kind of person. And he was discovering that, but experimenting with it to discover whether that was his natural state or was he still protecting himself. So he practiced more with feeling loved, and he was still quiet. Not into small talk, not into what he regarded as meaningless socialization. Not meaningless to other people, but meaningless to him. Just like some people like to play the piano and some people don't. The people who play the piano, with rare exceptions, don't criticize the people who don't. I was once criticized by somebody for not attending enough socials for a particular professional organization. And I said, well, so I'm going to put on an event at my house where we're going to bring in a bunch of pianos and we're going to invite a whole bunch of people to get together and play the piano together. Will you be coming? And he said, well, I don't know how to play the piano. And I don't particularly like to play the piano. And I said, I'll be darned. Point made. You don't particularly like to play the piano, and I don't particularly like to attend social functions. He said, well, it's not the same. I said, you're right, because it's something you like to do. Everybody has different preferences. So to this man, sitting around and socializing and doing small talk is, well, just not his preference. But he doesn't make fun of people who do like to do that, nor would I. He's a professional and got a good job, is paid well to do his job, and he did really very well. He got his first job out of graduate school not long ago. And even though he's relatively new on the job, he was really doing well. They were very pleased with how he was doing. He wrote to me. He said, today I just cringed from head to toe. He said, I just couldn't have been much more uncomfortable. He said, at work, we have 2 paid 15-minute breaks during the day to grab coffee or fruit or, whatever, or sit around the break room. And usually I skip them because I just don't feel like it. I'm in the groove working out a work problem and I don't like the interruption. Well, you get to have the right to do that. It's your preference. You continue. Today, I skipped a break again. And when most of my colleagues had gone to have coffee in the break room, my boss came in, grabbed a chair, and sat down next to me. And he said, Carl, how are you doing? How come you're not taking a break? And he's kind of hinted before that he worried about me not taking breaks before, thinking that I was putting too much stress on myself, that I was working too hard. That's the way he put it. But this time it was a little different. I said, I'm doing good. I just don't feel like I need to take a break right now. And so, I'll get some coffee later. And I put a hand on his knee and I said, don't worry about me. I think that's just an absolutely brilliant response. No kidding. That just handled beautifully. But then he replied something like this. I'm not really worried about your work. You do good work. I judge you on two things. Now, the word judge sounds harsh, but he's the boss, so he actually gets to judge your performance. I judge you on two things. One is work, and the other is how well you fit in the group. You're a shy person. You're quiet. You don't talk or engage in conversations as much as I do, for example. I'm very talkative, and I can just hear your boss saying this. People who are talkative and social often refer to it as the preferred condition. They don't realize that they're really just expressing their own preference. I'm a very talkative person, and so everybody should be a talkative person, which is just as ridiculous as saying I play the piano, so everybody else should. I play tennis, so everybody else should. I like to paint, and so everybody else should. No, people have preferences, but he's the boss, and so here he is saying, I'm very talkative. I want you, now, the rest of what he's about to say here, without reading it out loud, you can pretty much predict is, I want you to be more like me. But let's see what he says. So the boss says, I want you to get along well with the group. And the breaks are a very good and important opportunity for you to do that. I say this for your benefit. Take the chance and take the breaks. Now, first, there are a couple of things going on here. He judges you by how well you get along with the group. Now, are you causing any trouble with the group? No. The kind of work you do, this man is a professional engineer. The kind of work you do, how often do you do group projects? Well, it turns out pretty rarely. So what's the benefit of having group interactions? No obvious benefit, professionally speaking. Do you cause any trouble with the group? No. You've not reported any kinds of difficulties like that. Neither is your boss. Do you get in other people's way? Do you gossip? Do you criticize people? Do you interrupt people while they're trying to work? No. All of those would be measures of getting along with the group, wouldn't they? Yes, they would. I've done considerable work coaching, and I can tell you all those are really enviable qualities that many people don't have. They do get in everybody else's way. They sit in the hallways and gossip with people instead of working. In fact, to me, you would be an absolutely model employee. You come to work, you skip your breaks, you work all day long, you get the work done, you go home. I'd be going, whew, one less person I have to think about or worry about. But see, so what I'm telling you is you're not wrong. You're not wrong to not take the breaks. But he's the boss. So now you know the standard of this job, not the standard of life, not how people should be, but this job. What's the standard of the job? As it's written in the policy manual for the job? No. It's as defined by the boss, because he's the one who evaluates whether you're doing your job, and he doesn't give a hoot what the policy manual says or what your job description is. So your boss has now clearly stated the standard of your job, and it turns out that your job is to please him. I realize that that may not be entirely satisfactory to some people, but welcome to employment. That's always the job of the employee, to please the boss. So now you have to figure out, what is the boss's standard of pleasing him? Well, it's kind of good in a way. Many bosses have these mysterious, unspoken standards that nobody ever figures out. So it turns out you can't please them no matter what you do. Now, that's a tough job. This boss may have a weird standard, or a standard that is, well, doesn't seem entirely professional, but at least he's stating it. So he's coming right into your office and clearly stating that in order to please him, your job isn't just to draw up plans or do projects. So this is going to be great practice for you. He's telling you that in order to do your job, you have to get along with others. Oh, he didn't stop there. He defined what getting along with others is. You have to take your 15-minute breaks, and you have to go in and talk to people and drink coffee with them. Now, that sounds pretty artificial. So in order to do my job as an engineer, I have to go to the break room, drink coffee, and eat an apple twice a day for 15 minutes. Yes, that sounds kind of laughable to me too. But see, I'm not your boss. He's telling you, take the breaks, talk to people, and this isn't going to hurt you. Just talk to people and ask them how they're doing. Ask them about their families. Because see, you don't know how to do small talk. I get that. And you've never had really a reason to do it. Ask them about their weekends and their holidays. If you just do that, their families, how they're doing, their weekends, their holidays, you're going to fill the 15 minutes pretty easily every single day. And if you want to know how to do small talk even better, I'm not making this up, you can Google small talk with men. You can Google small talk with men at work. There will be articles that will teach you how to do small talk with men. That would seem mildly ridiculous to me, but not to your boss. So it can't be ridiculous to you either. And it's not much to ask. It would be, there are workplaces in Japan where, and in other countries, where for 15 minutes, perhaps twice a day, actually in some workplaces, before the workday starts when you're not being paid, where people get together and they actually do calisthenics. No kidding. They exercise for 15 minutes before work to get the blood going, because somebody in the hierarchy a long time ago decided that would make you happier and stronger. Well, it's not a whole lot to do in order to keep a good job. And you've said this is a good job. Now, should you have to do this? Well, maybe not in a perfect world. I acknowledge that this seems pretty arbitrary. Be much like me requiring people who work for me to come twice a day during the workday to go and practice the piano for 15 minutes. Now, that just sounds insane to other people, but it's no more insane than requiring somebody to go drink coffee and eat an apple and listen to people talk about mostly nothing. But your boss, for whatever reason, I'm not going to analyze him, needs you to be more like him and the rest of the team that he has put together, most of whom are more like him. So this is something you can do. Now, you can quit, but you're going to run into bosses who are going to have fairly unreasonable demands to make of you no matter where you go. And usually more unreasonable demands than this. And like I said, there are many bosses who have crazy demands of people. And if you ask them what they are, because they're perpetually unhappy, they can't even define them. At least this boss knows what he wants. He wants you to do your engineering job, and he wants you to drink coffee twice a day. Well, that just doesn't sound very difficult. So instead of thinking of it as annoying, which I know you do, and I understand, it's just part of your job. You continue. I blushed. It was so disconcerting to me. I got afraid that he didn't like me. He's just more comfortable with somebody who talks more and therefore fits his mold. If you don't talk, it's a guarantee that he came from a family where if you're silent, you're disapproving or angry, or both. And so he needs people to be talking to feel comfortable. It greases his social wheels, just makes him feel at ease. Does that require, because here's what you're worried about. You're worried about this man requiring that you change who you are when you're just barely figuring out who you are after a lifetime of being miserable. Does it require that you change who you are? No, it really doesn't. It just requires that you learn a new skill to use while you're still being yourself. You don't have to become the most outgoing person in the group. You don't have to lead parties away from work. You just go in and drink coffee and listen attentively and Google how to make small talk. And if you contribute now and again, and you're just in the room, you watch, it'll count. I've had to learn new skills all my life. I wrote the first real love book, and the largest publishing house in the world published it. And I thought, oh, I'll just sit back now and live on the royalties. And they said, so when will you be starting your seminar business? And I thought, what in the world are you talking about? And discovered that they print the books, they put them in their catalogs, they put them in some stores, and then all of the work of publicizing it, marketing it, getting it out there was going to be done by me. Well, that was disconcerting to me. I didn't have to become a different person, but I did have to learn some new skills. Boy, I had to learn to do radio interviewing and television interviewing and putting on seminars. And let me tell you, it was a whole lot harder than drinking coffee and eating apples. But I didn't have to change who I am. I'm still natively just a relatively quiet person. I spent the day today putting rocks up, great big rocks. Well, some of them were small, but stacking rocks in patterns that keep the bank of the river out behind my house from eroding. It's called riprap. It's what they call when they put erosion proofing in the form of rocks on a creek bank. I was just in heaven. And I'm doing this by myself, and Donna comes out periodically just to go, oh, the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I just can't think of anything else I would rather have been doing. But see, this man that you work for, not his favorite thing. He'd rather be sitting in the coffee room and talking to everybody. So I've had to add skills to who I natively am. So are you. You're not bad. You just learned that you need to do something different to be acceptable as an employee who is being paid by him. Not to be acceptable generally. No, just at work. And the same is true with me. I still do seminars. I still do interventions. I still do weekends. It doesn't change who I am. I'm not pretending when I'm doing those events that I enjoy being at the seminars. I'm not pretending to enjoy doing Real Love weekends. It's just not my favorite thing to do. But I've learned to do them and like them. Same is true with you. That's why I'm bringing this up. You don't just go to the break room and go, oh, crap, I'm having to put in my 15 minutes of coffee and apples. No. You learn how to go in there and do it and like it. It's 30 minutes out of your day. It's not a big deal. You continue. I became afraid that I wasn't good enough, that I might lose my job. I went into my head. I cringed. I just shivered from head to toe. It was awful. I'll bet it was. Considering that you've never had any social guidance, never been taught any social skills, never had anybody help you figure out who you are your whole life, Yeah, I'll bet it was pretty awful to have somebody come in and say, no, because this is what you would have heard. Who you are isn't good enough. You have to change who you are in order to keep working here. Yeah, bet it was just awful. I understand every word you're saying. So now get up off the floor. As my son says in his lectures, quit whining and figure it out. Get up off the floor and just start taking breaks and learn how to small talk. I'm figuring you already know how to drink coffee and eat apples, so you got that part nailed. Now it's just the small talk part, and you don't even have to do a lot of that. If you're part of a group of 15 people and you speak 5% of the time, they're going to see you as participating. If you simply look into the eyes of the people who are talking, you probably wouldn't ever have to talk, and they would see you as a social person. They would label you as a good listener, since they're the ones who want to talk in the first place. Your boss really wants somebody to listen to him, not talk to him. Really. So just listen. Try that at first. You continue. The thing is, I have not felt afraid at work, not up to now. I just don't like interrupting my day for 15 minutes twice a day to do nothing. I know. It's his problem. But because he's the boss, you have to address the problem. You continue. I'm quiet, and when I speak slowly and with a low volume, which I see as me being myself. I agree again. That is who you are. You are quiet. I know you. Even when you're happy, you're quiet. Although you do have some crazy moments where you laugh and giggle and act like a child and roll on the floor. You continue. Now I feel like I need to change who I am to be accepted. Yep. And we're kind of pounding this subject into the ground because it's so important for you to get it. Because it is terrifying you that you'd have to change again, or that you've been wrong all this time in figuring out who you are. You don't need to change who you are. You're just adding a skill. You can do it. You continue saying, damn, should I talk with him? Should I ask him about how I'm perceived by people at work, and at the same time thank him for letting me know or telling me about it? Take your pulse. Calm down. Breathe. Ask to meet with him. That's actually a good idea. And say, thanks for talking to me about being quiet and not taking breaks. I just hadn't thought of the impact that might have on the team. So I will follow your suggestions. Now listen to this last part. It's going to demonstrate not only are you willing to cooperate, but you mean it. So you say, I'm going to follow your suggestions, and in a couple of weeks, I'll meet with you again to ask you how you think I'm doing. Oh, honey, this whole conversation is really about your boss looking for people to listen to him, possibly even worship him a little bit, but we're not going to get into that. Listen to him. If you say what I just said, you'll be really listening, and he'll feel listened to. You say, for a minute, when he talked to me, I couldn't work or do anything. I felt worthless and alone. Have I grown? Have I learned anything? It felt like a punch in the stomach. Again, not a big thing. This is not a step backward, just something to learn. Now, for the benefit of everybody listening, just a couple of days later, he did it. He went to the boss. He thanked the boss for telling him this. He said to the boss, I didn't realize it was having this impact, so I'm going to start doing that. And he did do it, and he's doing it now, and everything's fine. You know how easy it would have been for him to say, this isn't part of the job description. I refuse to go in there and take a break. I'm going to sit here at my desk, and I'm going to be right. And in some ways, he would have been right. What part of being an engineer is eating an apple and drinking coffee? But see, there's more to a job than that. So he listened, he did what the boss suggested, and now he's part of the team. Oh, we could all learn from the humility and trust of this man. New subject. Years ago, I built a fish pond in the backyard. many years ago, big old fish pond. In those days, I didn't do anything small. And I put koi, decorative Japanese carp in the pond. And boy, there were lots of koi in the pond, and it was a beautiful thing. And it was fun to feed them and watch them swimming around, and did that for years. But there's always a price to every choice you make in life. It was fun to feed them and watch them swim around. I didn't anticipate some of the price. Yes, it cost something to put it in, and it took a lot of work, and we moved rocks with pry bars and muscle and cranes and bulldozers. It cost a lot in time, effort, money to put it in. Oh, but the cost to decisions usually continues. When you feed fish, it turns out, who knew? It comes out the other end. They poop just like every other animal, which I knew intellectually, but never really seen a practical example of, gives nutrients to algae, which grow everywhere here in Georgia, in the South. In warm weather, algae, there isn't a clear body of water in Georgia, pretty much. There's some really crazy exceptions, like some springs here and there, but it's like 4 in Georgia. No, every river, every lake just is green as can be because of the algae. And the fish poop is feeding the algae, and they're just loving this, and it usually balances out and everybody's happy. But it interfered with seeing the fish. So, I did some research and discovered I could add some enzymes and bacteria, and I could periodically change out part of the water, and the water would, clear up a little bit, and we worked out a kind of like a balance. And then years ago, there was a series of rains, and the creek behind the house flooded. Well, it's done that before, but for the first time, it flooded high enough that the water from the creek actually leaked into and out of the fish pond. And a bunch of native fish, bluegill, perch, minnows, the fish that are found in the creek, got into the pond. And then when the flood went down, well, the native fish were trapped there. And it turns out that the native fish just loved it that I fed them. In fact, they seemed to enjoy being fed more than the decorative fish did. And turns out that they turned food into poop too. And whereas the decorative koi require really very stringent conditions in order to multiply, and I don't have those conditions in the pond. So the same koi can live in your pond for 30, 40 years without multiplying. Whereas the native fish, apparently they don't require much, water and each other. So they're multiplying, and they're filling the pond with fish poop. Well, I didn't notice this for several years because it takes a while to, for all those little fish to fill up a pond with fish poop. And I'm throwing in chemicals and adding fresh water, and it would help for a little while, but then eventually it didn't help at all. And the water went green to greener to brown. Well, this wasn't working, and I wanted to see the fish in the pond again. So I decided to empty the pond completely. And I did. And oh my, did it take a lot of work. I tried a sump pump that wasn't even close to big enough. Eventually had to rent something called a trash pump, which I'd never heard of, with a 3-inch inlet hose. I mean, this is a great big commercial thing that they pump out huge volumes of water. The suction on this thing is such that it would just suck the glove right off your hand. In fact, a couple of times I got my hand sucked into the hose and could barely get it out. Never mind sticking it to my leg. Took a great deal of work. And in the process of getting rid of all the water, it then rained. And so the entire pond became pretty much a concrete boat. In World War II, in fact, they made boats out of concrete because they were less expensive than making them out of steel. They used them as cargo boats, a whole fleet of concrete boats Not kidding. Well, my pond became a concrete boat, and it turns out that the bottom wasn't as thick in concrete as it should have been. I didn't pour the concrete in the bottom of the pond in the beginning, and it just cracked the bottom of the pond. I mean, just in an area probably 15 feet across. And no matter what we did, it was just impossible to refill it and repair it. So I finally had to put in multiple pumps and concrete plugs and 9 yards of concrete, which is an entire truck full of concrete, and concrete block everywhere, and every tool I had, and 2 weeks worth of backbreaking labor. It was a lot. In fact, it was a great deal more than I'm actually describing. But I finally got the pond fixed. And now the pond is filled with clean water. And I can see the bottom again. And there are no more native fish. There's a metaphor in here somewhere. Our lives can be like this. They start off clean and easy. And then they get polluted with stuff. Algae, circumstances, other people who poop in our pond, leaves, grass, sticks, insects. Everything interacts with who we are. Everything gets into our pond and makes the water muddy, murky, filthy, polluted, something. We do our best to keep it clean, but sometimes, and this is where the role of real love comes in, if we don't have a foundation of real love to start with, eventually it becomes overwhelming, and we have to start over. We have to replace absolutely every bit of water in the pond, and sometimes it cracks, and sometimes we have to pour new concrete, and sometimes it's one enormous pain in the neck, and it's a lot of work, and it's messy, and it's difficult, and it's worth it. So I swam today in the pond, just doing some things that had to be repaired, and there's a device in there that's cleaning the bottom as we speak. Well, but it's going to be clean. And it was a lot of work to do it. And I had fun doing it while I was doing it. Almost all the time. There were a few times when I was up to my hips in concrete and couldn't move that it wasn't as fun. But what's the alternative? The pond turns brown and then nothing lives in it. So if your pond is getting to the place where you can't maintain it anymore, yeah, it might be time to do something other than what you did that got you to the place where your pond is brown and nothing lives anymore. Do it now. The longer you wait, the harder it gets. It's worth the effort. New subject. I know a man, Chris, who spent his life alone and unseen and not understood, not cared for. He became defensive and right, not an uncommon response to those conditions. I helped him to see the freedom that comes from being wrong. Once we admit that we're wrong, we're not attached to a position. We're not attached to a particular stance, which very often becomes like an anchor that sinks us to the bottom of the ocean. Being fixed seems like it's stable. Oh, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right. But what if your position's wrong? Then you're also dead. So when we admit that we're wrong, we're not fixed to a position and stuck, imprisoned, and we're now free to learn. As long as I'm right, I'm not going to learn anything. There are multiple cultures that have been depicted in movies and elsewhere where, the wise old man goes to fill the teacup, sometimes with yak milk or tea or, whatever. Always a wrinkled old guy, sometimes in a monastery. And he fills the cup to the top, and then he keeps filling. And the young student goes, well, stop, it's full. And the old man makes some kind of point like, yeah, it's hard to add tea or water or yak milk or whatever it is to a cup that's already full. If you're sure you're already right, it's pretty tough to be taught anything. So back to Chris. At work, he put a Post-it note on his computer screen to exemplify what he'd been learning. And the Post-it note said, right there on his screen, I'm wrong. Pretty smart guy. A coworker came by and said, how are you wrong? Try that sometimes. You will get people ask you questions. People don't say they're wrong very often. How are you wrong? And Chris said, one day I'll tell you about it. I'll tell you what that means. And the friend said, well, that doesn't sound very good. Because in society, the words I'm wrong or telling somebody they're wrong are usually followed by you're bad or I'm bad. And Chris just said, oh, I'll tell you about it sometime. And it's way better than it sounds. That's it. Didn't teach him real love, didn't teach him what he was learning in his life, didn't preach at him. That was the whole conversation. That is remarkable that he would handle it that beautifully, coming from an environment where he'd never been emotionally nourished. He felt free to put the message on his computer to remind himself, and then felt free, as in not obligated, to explain it to other people. He felt free not to explain it to other people, but not with an attitude, just said, don't worry about it. This is up here for me, and someday I'll explain it to you. He didn't say parenthetically, or not. Beautiful example of how he didn't feel obligated to justify himself, which most of us have felt all of our lives. New subject. A woman, Giselle, called me and described the relationship with her grandmother. Grandma is demanding, unhappy, and victimy, hardly rare conditions. In order to avoid her disapproval, Giselle cleaned Grandma's apartment twice a week, did all of her errands, and lots more things for Grandma. Grandma has other people who could do this, but they've all gotten absolutely sick and tired of Grandma being demanding, and so they just disappear and they're never available. They don't even answer Grandma's texts or calls. And Grandma could afford to hire somebody, but she loves being in control and bossing people around while they're in the house. Now, remember, everybody else has gotten sick and tired of this. In fact, she's never even kept a paid housekeeper because they won't put up with the controlling. But she found out that Giselle is a people pleaser, and she could keep Giselle pretty much chained to the floor as an unpaid slave. So I asked, and because Giselle brought it up, I asked Giselle how she felt about this whole situation with Grandma. At first she said, well, she's my grandmother, so I want to help. But let's just say that the words I want to help didn't match her facial expression or her tone of voice, like at all. So it was obvious that she did not want to help. So with a little assistance from me, she saw that how she really felt was this. She felt obligated. And boy, when she hit on that word, she just lit up, as in with fire in her eyes, not happiness. She felt obligated. She felt dutiful. She felt guilty. She felt controlled. And finally, she said, I'm just angry about it. I hate going over there. And then finally, at the end, she realized that she also feels really small and insignificant. How could you possibly feel important, valued, worthwhile, cared about when you're somebody else's slave? Not. You can't. So it turns out she's been helping Grandma all this time, claiming that she wants to, and it turns out it's exactly the opposite of that. She hates it. But she's imprisoned by her people pleasing. So I said, do you want to keep feeling small? Been killing you all your life, but, with your parents and everybody else, but you get to choose. Do you want to keep feeling small? It's not a rhetorical question. I'm really asking. She said, well, not really. I said, not good enough. Not really is a waffly answer. So decide. Yes, I really do want to stay small. I'm happy with that, pleasing people and getting the little crumbs of approval that they occasionally throw off the table. Or, no, I don't want to feel small anymore. If you want to be happy, you really have to make a choice here. She said, no, I hate feeling small. Okay, then. Now we have a direction. And there's only one way to change this. You have to eliminate any activity, possibly any relationship, that makes you feel less than worthwhile, which is just a synonym for small. Now, mind you, I'm not trying to get you to do anything. Don't do this to please me. That's why I asked you the question. Do you want to stay small? You just said no, and finally you said essentially hell no, emphatically. I don't want to stay small. All right, given that answer that you don't, here is what would be required to get there. You have to give up everything and everybody who makes you feel not worthwhile. She said, but I have to, and you've all heard people say this, kind of like, I have to go Christmas shopping, same tone of voice. It's not a pleasant tone when people say have to. But I have to help my grandmother. She'd be so disappointed and mad if I just suddenly refused to help her. And my mother would be pretty mad at me too. I said, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You are neck deep, kid, in obligation and guilt, right up to your nose. You can barely breathe. And because you're a slave to this, you feel small and unhappy. How could you not? You said you wanted to quit feeling small. So, kid, we're back to making a choice again. You're at a fork in the road and you can stand there at the fork, but if you stand there at the fork, you can't be happy because you're not moving, you're not growing, you're not going somewhere. Here's your choice. One, and I'm not going to make the choice for you. No matter what you choose, I'm going to be happy. Door number one, you can be grandma's slave and you'll stay small. And if you make that choice, I'll go, okay, well, Giselle wants to be grandma's slave and she has a right to do that. Or door number two, you quit cleaning. You don't clean less. No, you quit because you feel small every minute you're there, and you quit doing anything else over there for grandma, and you discover who you really are when you're not being controlled. But you can only choose one of those. If you go back and forth, door number one, door number two, 1, 2, 2, 1, 1, 2, you just as well choose number one because you're going to stay a slave. You're going to keep feeling small. You've already nailed feeling small. If you want to change it, you have to change it completely, not part way. Kind of like happened with my pond. I got to the place where throwing in a few bacteria and changing the water a little bit didn't help the fact that I discovered, like no kidding, when I got in there to suck all that stuff out, I was wading in 2 feet of fish poop. Gee, no wonder changing a little water wasn't making any difference. So Giselle stopped cleaning her grandmother's apartment. She made the choice that she didn't want to feel small anymore. I didn't push her to do it. That wouldn't have helped if I pushed her and she did it because I made her. She'd have felt small because of me. No, what do you want? I don't want to be small. So you got to choose. She chose not to do that. Then she took a bunch of her grandmother's stuff that grandma had been storing at her house, Giselle's house. She took it back over to grandmother's place and told grandma, you're going to have to decide what to keep and what to throw away, because grandma had been storing this stuff at Giselle's place for years because grandma's also shouldn't be a real big surprise. Why do you think she had to have her apartment cleaned twice a week? She's a hoarder. She keeps stuff. The stuff was cluttering up all of Grandma's house, now all of Giselle's place. It had been cluttering up everybody else in the family's place until they finally said no. And Giselle could see that it wasn't her responsibility to care for stuff that her grandma didn't need and didn't even know she still had, hadn't used in forever. So Giselle now answers her phone when Grandma calls, and Grandma calls many times a day, but she answers only when she feels like she has the emotional energy to give, never because she feels obligated. That's pretty remarkable. In fact, for a while, she just didn't answer the phone at all because she didn't know whether she had enough emotional energy. She went through a period of that for like a couple of months. Grandma will even come over to Giselle's house and bang on the door and demand that Giselle come out of her house and go over and clean Grandma's house or take her to do errands. Now, Grandma has the energy to come to Giselle's house, but not to do her own errands. You got that, right? But Giselle doesn't open the door when she does that because Grandma banging on the door without telling her that she's coming is by definition an intrusion or a demand, yeah? So if Giselle lets her in, she's going to feel small. The results have been astonishing. She feels so much happier. I said, isn't that something? To Giselle. People hate feeling trapped. They hate it. You hate it. You've been hating it all your life. You felt small because you felt trapped, like in a little teeny cage that shrunk and got smaller by the day. But now you don't. You get that you actually get to make choices now, instead of just being a servant ordered here and there. She said, I have never had this feeling in my life. And only recently could I even put a name to it. I feel confident. I didn't even know what that word meant. My whole family is criticizing me for not doing what Grandma wants. Now, this is a little ironic because her whole family had quit helping Grandma because they hated being pushed around, but they wanted to find somebody who would do everything Grandma wanted so Grandma would quit complaining. And so now they're criticizing Giselle for, not being the slave. Giselle continues, but I know that this was the right thing for me to do. I'm also finding out who my real friends are. No kidding. That's exactly when you do find out who your friends are. If you do what people want all the time, all you learn is what people want. That's all you learn. Well, that's not that hard. You could just pass out flyers and ask people what they want and have them mail them to you. You don't get anything out of a relationship just to learn what people want. You don't learn anything about yourself or your relationship or who loves you until you're not doing everything they want, until you're giving just what you can give freely. It's only when we're being ourselves, when we're making our own choices, that we discover who accepts us, who benefits from learning who's willing to be a slave. It sounds a little risky to be ourselves, like maybe we'll lose friends. I know you've had that fear. Nah, it's not risky. All we lose is our illusions about the people we thought were our friends. All we lose is the lies. In other words, we don't lose any real friends at all. If somebody really values you as a friend and you decide not to do something, you'll never lose a relationship with that kind of person. New subject. I know a couple who's having significant problems individually in their marriage, with their children. We learned that he has severe PCSD, a sense of worthlessness that is nearly impossible to crack. His world was defined from the time he was just a child as hurtful and frightening. So, even after learning about real love, even after being loved, he deflects or ignores or argues with every piece of loving evidence he's given. No kidding. He's almost impossible to talk to. It's pretty tough to change PCSD when somebody ignores the evidence they're given. The evidence they're given. The whole essence of treating PCSD is changing the events and the judgments so that the feelings and the behavior naturally follow. But if somebody refuses new evidence, refuses new judgments, pretty tough to change. And this is just as hard on her as it is on him. In fact, she wrote to me and she said, "This is how I'm feeling about the process that we've been going through." She said, "I have a room. I have acquired things throughout my life. Some I have chosen and some have just been placed there. Isn't that a fact? Much of the furniture in our lives was not placed by us, nor did we make it. That's pretty much the essence of PCSD." She said, "Sometimes I like my room, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I get all motivated and clean it out, amazed at how long I have let some things be in the way for so long. I become comfortable with the things in my room." She's talking to all of us, or for all of us. "I become comfortable even with the mess, like Grandma and Giselle. I like it, even though I would be embarrassed if somebody saw my room." Nice metaphor. "One day I looked into someone else's room, which was so organized and relaxing, and I realized that I've been living in a dump filled with useless stuff, or in my case, fish poop. My previous efforts to clean it up had failed, so I knew that I needed some help. I found a loving friend and asked for help. She didn't push me or criticize me. She just asked me questions about the things in my room and whether they were really serving me. Eventually, my room got pretty cleaned out, but it felt a little empty and foreign." No kidding. In the beginning, it's very disorienting. You continue. "I started to bring some things back in, like I had in the past, just out of habit, or to make it feel more familiar. But my friend helped me see what I was doing, so I did it less. I resisted a bit, but I could see she was right, and that I would be much more comfortable if I just listened and did what she suggested. After all, she didn't have a filthy room. I did. What did I have to lose? Eventually, I got my room pretty clean, but I was shocked to find out that just everyday living made it get dirty and disorganized again. Just like the fish in my pond filled it with poop every day, whether I helped them or not." She said it actually took pretty frequent maintenance, which was frustrating in the beginning, but that's just part of having a clean room, starting now and keeping it that way. Now I like keeping things clean. Once my room was clean, I noticed that my husband's room needed some help. He was pretty unhappy with it and spent a lot of time and energy just moving the furniture around but not getting rid of anything. Does that describe many of our lives or what? She said my kids' rooms were a mess too and were getting worse. Yeah, kids tend to follow our lead. You continue. "I could also see that my husband was very unhappy in his space. He hated to be there, but he couldn't leave either. He would often break things, but then would just sweep them under the bed and pretend that they're not there." Again, she's describing us. "As I started to help him, he'd get anxious and sentimental about the stuff in the room, even though it was broken and never done him any good. I asked my friend again to come and help my husband. She answered questions, but didn't push. He didn't want to hear her answers. Eventually, while helping him clean, I found some things that he'd been hiding there. It became clearer than ever that everything had to go. Everything. The room had to be emptied out so there were no materials there that would remind him of the temporary comfort that he got from his old possessions. Just like I had to completely clean out my pond. That simple act of cleaning everything out requires huge faith. So big that most people are not willing to do it. I'm sure it was almost everything that had made him comfortable. Everything that had to go. unaware that those things were also killing him. You conclude, he hated this. He fought and yelled and could not see why these things needed to go. He thought he was doing a fine job cleaning up himself and didn't need us to rip things out before he was ready to say goodbye. He hung on to the past, in other words. This is a great metaphor for all of us. Mostly, we're not even conscious of the things in our room. They've been there for so long that we no longer even see them. We don't remember putting them there, and in many cases, we didn't. And the ultimate irony is that those things are not who we are. They're just furniture in the room. They're almost always reactions to pain, trauma, and fear that we can't even identify. Once we get the room cleaned out, though, once we pump out the pond and feel safe that way, who we are is now free to furnish the room with the things that will contribute to our happiness. We get to pick our own furniture. We don't feel small anymore. It's a beautiful way to live. We'll talk again in a week.